Good evening, everybody.
Right on time.
The time is 6 p.m. and this meeting is hereby called to order. We have the presence of a quorum and this meeting has been duly called and notice of the meeting has been posted for the time and manner required by law. First up is our one and only information item, the 2019-20 Budget Development and Legislative Update. Dr. Dupree.
Yes, sir, Mr. President. You say one and only, and it is a one and only. As you know, for many months now, we've been talking about the legislative session. Our staff has been providing outstanding updates on a regular basis, and some of the board and many of the staff members have been in Austin quite a bit. And everything ended on time. We're not in special session, but there's a significant impact on Fort Bend ISD. Steve's going to get into this, and I don't want to steal any of his thunder, but I will tell you, talking to a lot of superintendents throughout the state, reading a lot of legislative updates, and Fort Bend is in the minority. There's a small number of districts who are not benefiting significantly from House Bill 3. In fact, we're somewhat in the hole when it comes to honoring all the mandates in House Bill 3. And we're going to tell you all about that this evening. Tonight, the goal is to really give an overview of the legislative impact on Fort Bend and to kind of set forth the budget we're going to ask you to approve next week that's been framed with all of this in mind. So with that, I'll flip it over to Steve, our CFO.
Thank you, Dr. Dupree, Mr. President, members of the board. So yes, this is our last briefing to talk about give you a legislative update and to go through our budget. So let's just get right into it. We're going to be talking about property tax relief and school finance reform when it comes to what happened with the legislature. Then Brian's going to be speaking about the mandatory compensation adjustments and what we have planned. He'll talk about the proposed budget, and then I'll wrap up with the road ahead. So there were definite winners and losers, and so we're addressing both Senate Bill 2 and House Bill 3. Senate Bill 2 was the property tax, and that had a lot to do with what's going on with us. And the House Bill 3 was the school finance reform. We're not a winner. And unfortunately, some of the things that were promised to us by some of our legislator friends were not delivered, and we're just left holding the bag. And so that's where we're at. So why are we on the short end of this? Just in summary, really, the main reason the cost of education index was eliminated because we had one of the higher ones. The cost of education index going away. If you had a low cost of education index, you benefited from that. Also, because we don't pay recapture, we really didn't benefit a lot. The recapture districts definitely benefited. And also our economically disadvantaged student population, while we're in the 45% range, the districts that had much higher percentages, 60+%, they were able to really benefit. And then also there was a switch to current year values that was thrown in by the Senate at the end. Now that impacted all districts pretty equally, but that was a one-time negative impact that we're not really feeling because of the hold harmless. So that's not going to have a long-term impact to us. And like I said, it does impact all districts. Okay. So one thing that I think is surprising to folks is that when you look at the math, and the math is done overall, the net investment with House Bill 3 and the impact of Senate Bill 2 is that the new investment into the school districts is really just about $3 billion a year. Okay, so it's not the $9 billion encompasses the impact of recapture. The overall cost of the bill statewide is $11.3 billion. But when you take out the property taxes, that benefit, you take out the recapture, what was available for schools there, you can see is about $3.2 billion each year. So how does that break out? If you look at the property tax reduction, it's 42% of that equation in 1920, 47% in 2021. I mean, the property tax compression and how they have it planned, is significant, and we'll talk a little bit about that. They had a certain amount, set aside that all districts are having to put into for compensation increases, and then the rest is other new school funding. So to address property tax reform, so they don't have the the rollback rate anymore. They'll have a voter-approved tax rate is what it will be called. But basically what this means for us in 2020, we're going to have tax rate compression of 7 pennies. We're going to go from $1 being that one base tax rate down to 93 pennies. Some of the districts that also had copper pennies already, they have more compression of their copper pennies. So that's why you may have heard that the tax rate compression was 8 pennies, and overall statewide that was probably about right. But if you did not have copper pennies before, you're just at 7, and which is where we're at. There are some districts that definitely had more compression than the 7 pennies that we have. In 2021. All districts with unanimous consent of the board will be able to add 1 golden penny, okay, if there's unanimous consent. But then there's going to be further tax rate compression depending on the characteristics of the district. So it's going to be different for every district. So I'll talk about that here in a second. But this is what our tax rate is going to look like on the M&O side. So on the M&O side, now we're at $1, or compressed rate is $1. And with 6 golden pennies, we're at $1.06. We'll go down to 93 pennies on the compressed rate. We'll still have the 6 golden pennies, so our rate will be 99 cents for the M&O, okay? So there will be 7 pennies of tax rate compression. So how will the 2.5% work? So the 2.5% isn't in play now, but it will be for the next year. Okay, so it's effective September 1st, 2020. So if local values grow by more than 2.5%, okay, and then they also have to work in, the student counts have to be part of that equation. We're not going to be able to levy more than that, more than 2.5% on a per student basis, more than the prior year. So our revenue is going to be limited to 2.5% of a gain. So districts have different property values, and they have different property value growth. And so the amount of compression, and what they'll do is that to limit you to the 2.5, your tax rate would be compressed. If you have growth at 2.5, you'll have no compression. But if you have growth of 5% or 7% or whatever else, you will have some compression. And so the TEA will calculate each district's Tier 1 rate based on the way Senate Bill 2 is going to work. So that's going to kind of push back things. That's going to push back the calculations. We'll have to see whether or not we'll still be able to adopt tax rates in September, which is what's been our practice. Hopefully it won't get pushed into October, because that's when bills usually get sent out. And so we'll have to see how this process is going to work. And we really don't have a lot of other clarity besides what I'm just telling you right now. So we don't have any kind of procedures behind a lot of this yet. So let's talk about the foundation school program and the funding formula changes. Okay, so of course, I mentioned the CEI change. There's many things on here that we've spoken about, but this is kind of the summary of the differences. Some of the big rocks include a new spectrum of comp ed funding. We have a slide for that here in a minute, and that's one of the big changes. There is CT funding in the 7th grade. That's new for us, and it'll help. Dual language is something that we're really going to have to look at to see really how much more would we have to invest in our program to be able to get that additional funding. And so we're going to have to look at that and get back to you on that. There is going to be higher new instructional facility allotment funding. It's the same as before, but they're actually going to put money into it this time. Last time they were supposed to put as much as $1,000 per student, because when you do open a new campus, there are some unique expenses. So hopefully that'll help us out as we do open new campuses. One of the other things there at the end, extended year funding. That may be something we may be able to get some help on, because we do some of that with our ELC. And so anyway, we're going to be looking at things. I'm going to be at a legislative debrief with Texas School Alliance on Wednesday, and as the dust settles and everybody's really kind of picking things apart, as we learn more, we'll pass that along. And I think you're going to be getting some briefings when you go to that conference soon. So comp ed funding is really one of the major changes, and the whole point is to drive more funding into the comp ed area, but it's going to be based on federal data. Okay, it's not going to be based on what the students are submitting, and so there's just a general consensus that a lot of children, and I guess mainly the secondary, they don't necessarily put in for the application And so we don't get the dollars for that. You know, they may think there's a stigma associated with it. I mean, the comp ed and the application process we go through now will still be important, and people will still want to know what our free and reduced percentage is. Obviously, it's important for the on the child nutrition side, because that's how we determine if meals are free or if they're reduced. But it'll also have an impact on accountability, and so we'll have to see how that works out, or how they're able to work the census information into the accountability. But the fact is that there really isn't anybody in Austin that can tell me what our comp ed numbers are yet. They're working on it. So how they've calculated out the total cost of the bill, I'm not sure how they did that. So we'll have to see. But we're going to submit census tract information to the agency. They're going to pull in the federal information. I think there's going to be a lot of consultants that are going to earn a lot of money over on this in terms of how to interpret this for school districts. But the impact on us is really unknown. I do think that this may push us up above. I've heard that because of our density in some of the areas, the higher density that you have, the more related funding that you get. And because while we're at 45% free and reduced, we have definitely pockets where there's a high density of free and reduced children, and so that would be at the higher weighted amount. Right now the weights are at 0.2. It's supposed to go up to 0.275, so we're talking about a pretty significant increase in those weights if you have high density. And so we'll have to see. Well, I'm cautiously optimistic as to what that'll mean for us from a funding perspective. So this is really the fruits of our labor, you know, the Formula Transition Grant. You know, at first, whenever I was reading House Bill 3, I mean, I was honestly, I was pretty kind of down in the dumps. I thought that we had just wasted all of the time that we had put in, all the visits and whatever else. But Brian reminded me, he said, well, we have the we have the transition money. And Chairman Huberty did mention our district, and Katie, whenever it was an amendment, you know, for the bill. So anyway, this is what works for us. The issue is that it is a hold harmless that'll expire in 5 years. What'll be interesting is we're still to determine what is our real number under House Bill 3. It's not 0, okay? I mean, so it's somewhere between 0 and 18.8, okay? And as we know more about comp ed, and as we know more and we see what's happening with the funding formulas, we'll be able to tell the board what we really think that hold harmless amount is. I think it's probably 2 or 3 million. That's my guess, based on what I've seen with some of the runs have been done. But I do think, I'm cautiously optimistic that when we have the comp ed money, it may put us over that, so that we won't have a long-term hold harmless situation. But when we know more about that, we'll definitely update you. So full day pre-K was a big deal in the bill. Besides the change in comp ed funding, having full day pre-K mandatory for eligible 4-year-olds was one of the major changes. But they're not going to fund it the typical way. We're still going to get the half-day ADA. They're funding it through the early education allotment. We've spoken a little bit about that in the past, and there is a gap in the funding of a few million. So we'll have to see how that shakes out over time. Districts are going to be able to get a waiver if they have space issues. We're not in that category. We do have space. And so anyway, we're working on it, and there's another slide to talk about how we plan on implementing full-day pre-K. But as I mentioned, the early education allotment is designed to fund it. Statewide, it works out, but sometimes there's pluses and minuses on a statewide basis.
So are you about to transition to the
yeah,
next?
Yes.
I thought I was going to make just 2 observations. One, and I think the board, you're all going to be at the Summer Leadership Institute Wednesday night, and you're going to hear some of this. But one of the key numbers I've heard is that out of this legislative session, there are over 246 items that the TEA has got to write rules around related to this bill. So at this point, they don't have the data or the manpower capacity to deliver all this information even before really August and September, when other districts and all the districts are going to be adopting their budgets. We're certainly a June adoption, so we are hamstrung to a certain extent, but even districts who will come after us will have the same issue. And that ties specifically to the comp ed piece, like Steve was mentioning. So I think those are important things for us to remember as we still have some of those question marks and gray areas as we work through these things. I did want to invite the board, though, because this presentation is pretty well chunked. I thought it might be good, rather than trying to take it all in, to maybe let you respond with any questions around this piece before we go into the salary compensation and the compensation pieces. So, and certainly we can cover any questions at any time, but I thought if you had questions about this revenue piece so far, it might be good to take those now while we're here.
Good idea, Dr. Dupree. Mr. Rice?
Thank you, Mr. Burdine. Mr. Bassett, did I hear you say that Ryan Gunn discovered that transition budget piece?
Well, he reminded me of it. I mean,
He reminded you.
yeah, I mean, I knew about it, and we knew that it was there, and that's how we've been, once it was passed, that is how we've been planning, because it's a lot easier for us to figure out 3% above current law than it is to figure out really what is the House Bill 3 number. And so that's the only, that's trying to make lemonade out of lemons, but we were able to do that, at least to have some amount of certainty there.
Good job, Mr. Gunn. Now, on the compressed rate, I just wanted to ask. So the state has compressed us, the tier 1, from $1 to 93 cents. So they compressed it 7 cents. We still have 6 golden pennies. So 93 and 6 is 99 cents. So our new tax rate, M&O, is 99 cents.
Yes, sir.
Now, the golden pennies are still tied to the Austin yield?
No, they're not. They did get brought down. They are discounted, as we mentioned. I think it's instead of 126, dollars, per watt. I mean, it's at the 96. So it was a significant decline.
Dropped $30
Yeah.
per watt per penny.
Mm-hmm.
So you take 30 times 77,000, or we're closer to 90,000 watt.
Yeah, so it's a lot. The golden
Times
pennies aren't
6.
worth nearly as much as they used to be, but they're still worth way more than our current penny.
But is it still tied to the Austin yield? Is that what they call
No,
it? What do
it's
they call
tied.
it
It's
now?
a percentage of the basic allotment. So as the basic
Percentage of
allotment goes
basic
up in the future, the value of the golden pennies will go up in the future. But they decoupled it from Austin because Austin's just crazy growth, and they expect that to continue. And it's not just because Austin's growth has been high, but because they lose students to charters, the wealth per WADA has been going up that much more.
Right.
So when your wealth is going up and your enrollment's going down, that
So the
puts the
state
state in a
created a
bind.
monster they don't want to pay for anymore.
you could say that.
Okay. Then on the 2.5% compression, so what I'm hearing you say is if we're getting a new chief appraiser, by the way, is coming in. If he certifies our property tax values have increased 5%, we'll only get the benefit of 2.5% of that value. Is that how they're doing that?
Right, the district will, and again, it's going to be done on a per student basis, so that's going to be one of the variables in there, because if you are growing in students, they don't want to short you, per se, but it's going to be on a per student basis, we'll see what the formula is exactly, and so they'll use that 2.5% to reduce the M&O tax rate further. The current estimates are that most districts can expect compression next year of 4 to 5%. I mean 4 to 5 pennies. We'll have to see. I'm not sure where they're coming up with that. I think that's on a statewide basis. If they expected 7% more value growth throughout the state, I think that's probably where that comes from.
And piggybacking on what you said, Dr. Dupree, your comment here, Mr. Bassett, on slide 10 says the TEA has to calculate each district's tier 1 tax rate. And why is that? It's not, when you say that, I'm not understanding what they're going to calculate.
So they're going to take the certified values that are submitted. Okay, they're going to take that information. Then they're also going to have the state information, and then they're going to calculate. Just what I'm being told, they're going that amount is going to be different, potentially different for every district. I'm sure there's going to be some that'll match up because there's 1,000 districts, but there's going to be a range of compression that'll over years will occur.
Is it still 12 months in arrears?
No, it's not. It's going to be based on current year values, which is also going to make it a little bit more interesting, and with a more it's going to have to be a more robust settle-up process later that has more of a chance to have some plus and minus swings in it.
So the TEA is going to do it, not the Comptroller's Property Tax Division?
That's my understanding.
So the TEA is growing.
Yeah,
They're going to have to add staff. So
perhaps.
we're growing the government in Austin. We're adding bureaucracy. That's good. Good news. And then so we're going to move our tax rate adoption to September or October?
Well, actually, we've been doing it usually in September. Okay, usually we've been doing it early in September, but we'll have to see how it plays out in terms of when we get all the information, and if TEA really is able to deliver that information early, for us to adopt. Because remember, before you adopt, you have to publish, and so there's a timeline that you have to follow in the truth and taxation laws, and so we'll have to see how that works out. What'll be interesting, and so I'll just indulge me here for this comment, but I think what's going to happen is that I really think it'll be a matter of time before there'll end up being lawsuits over the tax rate compression, because District A could be right next to District B, and District A has way more industrial capacity, okay, and their tax rate will drop significantly in comparison to District B, and so somebody here could be in a $200,000 house versus a $200,000 house. They could have a tax rate difference of 15 pennies within just a few years. And so then you could end up also having more industry than wanting to move into that district because their rate is lower. Because we know that companies, when they move, they shop tax rates. They shop all kinds of things. So yeah, there's going to be some unintended consequences of this over time.
And can you remind me what the state put in place to make up for the predictable and reliable revenue stream of local property taxes? What is, they decided not to do the state sales tax. How are they funding this now?
Well, so they were looking at potentially doing a swap between the sales tax and the property tax, okay? And so they haven't increased the sales tax, although the sales tax collections are robust and will be funding most of this. But they're looking at some of the other revenue streams, including oil and gas. And so there's some instability there that folks are definitely worried about.
As long as the state economy is growing and oil and gas production are up, we're okay.
Yes, sir.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Rice. Mr. Rosenthal.
So Steve, in terms of our current tax rates, so right now we're $1.32, right? So $1.06 on the M&O, 26 on the INS fund.
Right.
Okay. So the INS fund is not going to change, right? They're not talking about.
There's no compression on the INS
No
fund. The
compression.
Senate bill
Exactly.
Senate bill does not impact the debt service. Now we're going up 2 pennies because of just
Right.
our bond 2018.
Right.
That's correct.
Right. Okay. So basically, when folks get their bill in the mail, the next time around, it's going to be $1.25, 99 cents plus the 26.
So it'll be plus 28. So we're at 26. We're going to go up to 28. So it's 28 plus
Right,
99.
plus my one, I wasn't counting. I'm just talking about current, right?
Right.
Okay. So that's what. So folks are going to be, wow, this is great. Okay, but we're still going to be looking for money. So when you talked about the $18 million because of the transition, is that over the 5 years?
No, it's per year.
It is per year.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
It's per year.
All right. And so, can you explain a couple things here? So in the under the foundation school program, repeal of GT weight. So basically, we're getting cut based on our percentage of GT based on our GT population.
Well, so the GT repeal, okay, all school districts were funded at 5% of ADA. So all school districts were getting funded that. They eliminated that and put that money straight back into the basic allotment.
Okay.
Okay, so we're not losing that per
Okay.
se.
All right. Okay, that's good, because it looks like they're kind of not valuing that population.
Yeah, so they still have some procedures in place of things that we have to do to still show that we have a robust program.
Okay, and then the increased mainstream weight, could you please explain that as well?
So the weight that we get for mainstream students is 0.1, okay, which is, that's the same actually for bilingual, but that's being increased to 0.15, and so they're increasing that by 50%. That'll help us to the tune, I think, of about 800,000. I think was our number. So it doesn't hurt. I mean, we'll take every bit we can get, but we still think that we're below that floor. Okay, in terms of the 3% above current law.
Okay, and then back to a comment you made when you were addressing Mr. Rice's question. You were talking about the tax rates on a per student basis. Can you just explain? I can't vision that.
Well, yeah. So I mean, the way I think it'll work, I mean, I'm going to have to show you on a blackboard or what? No, we have whiteboards now. But anyway, I'll have to show you something along those lines, and we'll create some slides to show you. There's some formulas that I've seen, but I haven't seen where where they're working that in. But then I've read that it's being put in. And so I'm really going to wait to see what the consultants tell us, in all of these debriefings in terms of how it works. But you have to, if a school district is growing, okay, you can't just limit them to 2.5 if they also have growth of 2.5% in their students, because then they would really need 5%, growth in revenue. And so they have to work that in somehow. Conversely, for the districts that are actually going down, then 2.5%, the way the state sees it, is too much for them to have from a revenue perspective. So they have to modify it somehow on a per student basis.
Okay. All right. Still a little cloudy, but
Most definitely.
yeah. All right. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rosenthal. Mrs. James?
So picking up where Dave left off on that tax rate, that's the what you're calling the tier 1 tax rate.
That's right.
So that's just to mimic what Mr. Rice said, so that's going to be one new department that they're going to have to work on figuring that out.
Yeah.
And then there's a second piece of that. I think you talked about the comp ed rate. That's a separate calculation, or is that part of that?
No, that's definitely a separate calculation. So that's based on the student demographic. It's to help us determine, the makeup of our student body, and how much of our student body should be funded additionally, for the impacts of poverty. The free and reduced percentages that we've relied on for long time. It's not a perfect system. Because we know that not everybody applies that is due those benefits, and so I think the state wants to try to rely on these census tracts, but how all that works, I'm not really sure yet.
All right, so that's kind of a to be determined
Yes, ma'am.
piece of it too. Okay, so
And it's very material, though. I mean, it's a big number, so
Right,
we'll have
right.
to see how that works out.
right, and so then in terms of the budget planning, you guys have put a number in for.
Well, we're fortunate in that we know that we're at least going to have the floor. We're going to at least have the 3% of current law, and that's what we're building, and that's what we've published, and that's what our recommendations that we're going to give to you are based on.
So sorry to interrupt you, but
It's okay.
that's an increase of 3% from current law? Is that
Yes,
what you're
ma'am.
saying?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and then that goes to, I guess the slide, well, I lost track of which slide it is, but the one where you had the 18.3
Right.
million or something. That's,
Yeah.
okay, so that's that total amount, or that's basically the 3%?
We already had an increase. We were gonna have an increase based on current law, because remember, current law had the Austin pennies built in.
Right,
And TA is still gonna have to keep track of the Austin pennies and what they would be as part
Okay.
of this hold harmless for the next 5 years. And so, just like many of
even
the
though
other.
they're funding them at $30 less
Yeah, exactly,
per water. Okay.
exactly.
Okay, so that's all, that's the black box of school funding now.
Yeah, it didn't get simplified, that's for sure.
Okay. Well, thanks for trying to simplify it so we can at least talk about it in, polite conversation.
Yes, we know.
In the grocery store and things like that. Okay, so then related to the next slide, which has to do with pre-K, are we, in our pre-K funding, are we being hurt or helped, or is that, or none of the above?
We're being hurt, okay? We're not getting enough incremental funding to cover the costs associated with pre-K, okay? Now, but we are getting new money overall. And, I think when the dust settles, we'll have to, come back and show you, okay, here's really what, what the mandatory amount was, what are we putting in above and beyond that? Because we don't, one of the things that we're doing is an 11-to-1 ratio. We're gonna have an aide and a teacher in every pre-K classroom. Well, you don't have to do that, but if we're gonna start it, we want to start it right. And so anyway, we're gonna have to look at that, and we'll get back to the group in terms of showing you what we think that the net, if, in the end, is there a net unfunded mandate? What I'm gonna kind of skip ahead a little bit to the upcoming briefing. We're gonna invest more into compensation than what's being mandated, because we feel like we have to be able to compete. And so we could have spent that money on pre-K entirely if we wanted to.
Okay, I was just trying to get the narrative in terms of, we can make the choices later on, but in terms of the impact of the new law, that's what I wanted to understand. And certainly we value pre-K, and we want to continue that. I don't think there's any doubt about that, and we want to do it right. I don't think there's any doubt about that either. So
Right.
I just wanted to understand if the early education allotment was actually going to cover the mandate, and so I got the answer.
Yeah, I
is
don't think it will. It'll be short.
Okay, then picking up on another question that Mr. Rice asked, the hypothetical, so we are only allowed a 2.5% growth year over year, but let's say our property value increases 5%.
Mm-hmm.
So I think you said there is if some of that is growth with new housetops, i.e. new kids, that doesn't hurt us. But if the property, well, actually, I don't know.
Well, I think the easiest way to understand it, let's assume we have no enrollment growth.
Okay.
If
enrollment
we
growth's
have
fine.
no enrollment growth, if we have property value growth of 5%, we're going to be limited to 2.5% in terms of new total revenue growth, and so there will be tax rate compression that'll make up that difference of the 5%.
So the citizens will still be taxed the full 5%.
On their assessed value, but the compressed rate for us will drop, and so they'll see some savings in that way. But again, I don't think it'll be a net decline, for them. Maybe it'll be just equal. Okay, but they will pay fewer pennies. There will be compression, and so that's the way it'll work out. I mean, we're going to have to, wait and really see some examples, of how it works,
Right.
especially once you mix in the student counts and how that works.
Okay.
I wish we had a little more clarity on it, but we just don't yet.
Yeah, no, that's okay. I'm just trying to understand what people are going to experience, because those are, And I'm interacting with these people, and they're saying, oh, well, this is great news, school funding is fixed. And I'm trying to explain, well, actually, it's not really fixed, and in Fort Bend, it's not fixed, and it's probably worse. So I'm trying to understand what that means to a homeowner, or or to a property owner, and what that, and then, so it means one thing to the property owner, and it means another thing for our kids in our actual classrooms and our operations as a school district. So
Right.
that's what I'm just trying to understand,
Oh, yeah.
how to talk about it. Okay, and then you might have answered this, but just for clarification, back on slide 5, you talked about the increase, so the $3 billion, essentially $3.2 billion per year for the system as a whole, statewide. Is all of that coming from something else, or is that a one-time from the rainy day fund, or
No.
is that a regular budget?
This is regular
shift?
budget, recurring funds. It's a shift,
Okay,
okay? Because there is gonna be less recapture, and there is gonna be property tax relief. And so, but the state is putting in more money into the system, but in the end, the school districts outside of recapture, or, well, even the ones that are in recapture, all the school districts will be benefiting from that last column on the right. But it's not the windfall that a lot of folks necessarily, thought it would be.
right, okay, well, I just want to get that clear, because at one time, there was talk about one-time money, or some of the funding for the different pieces of this being one-time money.
Yeah.
And
Well,
I heard
I
you
think
say
that, I think whenever they went from 9 billion, okay, and it was like actually 9.6, whenever they added to get it to more compression, that's when the change to current year values came in. But the change to current year values is a one-time thing, and that's why there are definitely some folks nervous about the ability for the state to absorb that compression on a
Year-
continual
year after
basis,
year.
year over year.
Yeah,
I mean, I think when you look at the math now, it'll work. But if you change, a variable or two, we could just be reliving 2011 again.
and you don't know why, and you don't know how the market is going to react, as you said, the market to the property values, essentially.
Right.
Not to mention, a good part of this is, on the shoulders of the oil and gas industry, and their success. And so, if there's a shift in that, then there's
ma'am.
risk to the state economy. So,
Yes, ma'am.
okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. James. Mrs. Tolsan?
Yes, I just had
Sorry.
one clarification on what you said. So, again, does the compression affect the INS rate?
No, sir, not at all.
So the rate's still gonna be, I mean, if property values go up 5%, there's not gonna be a compression on the INS.
That is correct.
So
There will
it's
be
not
no
gonna be a
compression on the
full-
INS.
It's not really gonna be a full 2.5% compression. I mean,
So they're
in the
going to look
eyes
at
of
the M&O
homeowner.
fund on its own
Right,
to determine that compression. That's correct.
but they're not gonna, so again, if, let's just say next year, Fort Bend County has a 5% increase in property values, and let's assume no growth, okay?
Yeah, no growth in students.
So folks are still gonna see 26 cents on their tax bill for INS.
hmm
That's not gonna get compressed.
That's right.
Okay, good, thank you.
Thank you, sir. Mrs. Tolsan?
Right, and I just want to start by reminding everyone that the state is constitutionally prohibited from levying a property tax, which means they are constitutionally prohibited from doing exactly what they're doing. It frustrates me as a lawyer. This is counterintuitive to me. So they're controlling and setting the property tax rate, and then they're not allowing us to even ask our constituents if they want to raise their own property taxes, which to me is absurd. So that's, I mean, that's part of what we're dealing with here as well, is that we can't even go out and explain to property owners in Fort Bend ISD what's happening and how their schools are going to be impacted, and even give them a choice of whether or not they want to raise their property taxes in order to combat some of this. So that
That's exactly right.
makes our job really, I don't even know why we're here. I mean, I told one of our state reps, I don't really know why I'm here, because you're legislating it all from Austin. And so, I mean, let's list the number of things we don't know. We don't know how much money we're gonna get. We don't really know what the formulas are gonna be. We don't know what the compression's gonna be. And so we have put into the hands of the Texas Education Agency, not the Texas Financial Agency, now is going to be calculating the details of property values and student growth and digging into why property values are growing in Fort Bend ISD and the other 1,100 school districts around the state. And we trust TEA to get this right and do it in a timely manner when they broke federal law by capping special education and broke federal law by not even paying school districts the money that they have sitting in the bank account for special ed students, and botched the STAR test to the point where we didn't even have data a couple years ago, and now we've got reading level issues with, I just can't even wrap my head around why we're growing that kind of bureaucracy in an agency that is struggling to do the education piece that they're actually statutorily authorized to do. So how are we going to be able to plan? Do we truly expect the TEA to be able to get us the data that we need in order to budget and plan in a timely manner? I mean, I can't see how it can happen. I mean,
Yeah. It's really going to be a challenge for July 1st school districts. It's going to be a major, major challenge.
well, not even this year. So they don't even have the current expertise to do this. They will have to hire people,
Probably.
yeah, to do this. So that's the first curve. And then, yeah, right. Maybe they should ask us how to do it, because I bet we could do it a lot quicker than they could do it, just because of how much we have to dig into it constantly to try to figure out what's going on. So we have the transition funding. So what I hear you saying is that we're gonna budget on a 3% increase because that's the minimum.
Yes, ma'am.
I mean, that's what we're gonna get. So really, what all this other stuff is, which is up in the air, we're gonna ignore that for now, because we're gonna get at least 3%. That's our transition funding that our state legislators promised we were gonna get, and we got it for at least 5 years. Is
And
that
that's,
right?
yeah, and I've seen that printed in the bill, and so no,
Yeah,
I'm confident
I read
that it
it.
is there.
Yeah, I read it too. So I guess for at least 5 years, we'll have to do that. And hopefully in the next 5 years, TEA can find a way to get taught up and we can figure out what the actual numbers are gonna be. So my other concern is that special education funding is not really included in this. And a lot of legislators like to say that it was included in it because on slide 12, we talk the increased mainstream weight. I want to make sure everybody understands what that is. That means number of special education students who are taught in the regular classroom, because the weights are really backwards, or they're counterintuitive to best practices for education, where you should be having more inclusion, but you get less money for more inclusion, even though it still costs many times as much to educate a student with a disability in an inclusive environment. So they increased that 0.5, did you say?
Yeah, from 0.1 to 0.15.
Okay, 0.15, so 0.05. Okay, so we got a little bit of increase there, but really it doesn't help us a whole lot in the area of special education, where we're supposed to have, what, a $25 million gap? Pretty
Yeah,
close?
it's a drop in the bucket compared to what we're looking at in terms of growth in special ed.
So we're still going to have probably a gap in funding pre-K, probably a gap in funding the salary mandate, and as you said, we have to increase that anyway in order to remain competitive with surrounding districts. And we're gonna have a huge gap in special education. And just doing like some quick math in my head, that doesn't add up to the 3%.
No, I think we're okay with this year, okay? But I mean, I definitely see us I mean, a TRE in 2020, I think will be a necessity. I mean, that's definitely what I see in the future.
So we really need to make sure that we're educating our constituents on the real impact and the fact that 3.2 billion is not 9 billion, and which is the conversation we had with the speaker, is that it's not actually what they're saying it is. So we've established that we don't really know what the permanent revenue stream is to fund this. We hope sales tax will cover it, at least the majority of it, but we don't really have a permanent revenue stream that's been identified.
That's my understanding.
Is the state still budgeting on 7% property growth?
That's what they had done whenever they put together, the LBB forecasts.
That's the budget they passed.
Right.
Yeah,
So,
they budgeted
so
for
I think they
7%.
made they had to have made some changes, to get it through appropriations, but how that all shakes out in the end, I'm not sure.
So, back to Mrs. James's question about if we have, no, I know, it doesn't match, it doesn't add up. So if we have 5% growth and we're compressing at 2.5%, is the compression also for cities and counties or just school districts?
It is also for cities and counties.
So the taxpayer, so the state's not going to get that extra money. The taxpayer's just not going to pay those extra pennies.
For those entities, that's correct.
Okay. Do we know, did this bill budget for more TEA staff? Did they give TEA more money to be able to?
I honestly don't know if there, if anything along those lines. I mean, it certainly wasn't anything in the bill itself along those lines.
So it's an unfunded mandate for TEA also.
Yeah, perhaps.
To figure out how to do this. So does this law takes effect when? When was it?
September 1st.
So TEA has to have 200 and something new regulations written in the next 246 written in the next 3 months, 2 months, really, 2.5 months. Okay. The state is constitutionally prohibited from levying a property tax. That just is mind-boggling to me that we're talking about these things. Well, I want to thank you guys for, for your work on this and getting on it so quickly and trying to keep us informed. Yeah. Go ahead.
Mrs. Helliger?
Thank you. Just a couple questions. If you can't write the 246 by the time we need it, what happens? What happens? It just gets postponed when we can. What happens?
I honestly don't know. I mean, I'm sure there's some regs that are more important than others, that'll get prioritized. I mean, one of the things that they are working on now is they were going to give guidance to all of the other districts that are expecting revenue above the floor on exactly how to calculate the mandated salary increases. Mm-hmm. That's the biggest pressing issue right now. With us, that's easy. We're paying above the mandate. So we're not as concerned with how exactly that gets calculated. We have an idea, and we know that we're above. And so I'm not worried about us being compliant for that. But there are definitely district after district that are worried about how they're going to comply with that salary mandate. And so that they're working on that one first. But the impact of the others, I just don't know.
I think in general, Ms. Helliger, what'll happen, this happened back in 2006, I believe, and after the West Orange Cove lawsuit was resolved. All the districts do their best, and then the rules come out. And that year, they actually did not do a true-up at the end to reconcile the districts to the new rules. They just said, clean break, next year, we're going to go forward, and then we're going to true it up after the second year. So it truly is, there's a lot of free-form districts doing the best, doing their own interpretation. We've got a lot of organizations, TASA, TASB, TASBO, everybody's working, and so everybody's triangulating the information and all the different interpretations to do the best they can to get a budget adopted.
Okay. And then I guess my second question to you, Kristen, is why are you the only lawyer that thinks this? I know there's a bunch of lawyers in Austin. Why aren't they fighting for, why don't they know this rule?
They did. We did fight for it.
You know what I'm saying? Our state legislators.
They do. They know.
I'm just perplexed. I'm sorry.
Yeah, they know.
Oh, okay.
It's,
Well, I want a lot of things.
they
Then
just
I'm
ignore
prohibited
it,
from
and
do-
that's why we filed the lawsuit that we filed, and the Supreme Court said it's terrible but not unconstitutional, and go fix it. So they just basically punted and left it up to the legislators.
Okay.
So
All right, thanks.
Mr. Rice?
Thank you. Thank you. One last question, Mr. Bassett. What is the recapture threshold for Tier 1 and the Tier 2 copper pennies now?
Okay, so I don't know if we have that on here, the recapture has been 514,000 per WADA. With the new basic allotment, it's gonna go up substantially. So the new basic allotment is 6160. Okay, so it's gonna go up to over 600,000 in terms of that threshold for recapture.
Over 600,000.
Right, so that's in terms of the tier 1 recapture.
Right.
The copper pennies are moving up from 319,000 per WADA, which we were above that, to I think 460, a little bit higher. I need to go back and look, but we're still well below that
Right.
in terms of any future copper pennies that we have. If we get them, they will not be subject to recapture.
Copper's going to 460.
Yes, I think that I need to check that, but I think that's directionally correct. Yes, sir.
Okay. We were at like 414,000, weren't we?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
I mean, that really is literally a number that changes every day with the student population and the property values. But we're in the low 40s.
Mr. Rosenthal?
Okay, just to follow up on that. So they're increasing the recapture thresholds, right? At the same time, they're decreasing, or they're putting in caps on revenue growth,
Yes.
or on property growth.
Right.
So it seems like they're never going to get, well, it's probably going to be pretty hard pressed for them to ever get recapture money, or they're going to get a lot less of it. And I think
They're going to get a lot less recapture,
That's what
but they're
your
not
slide was
going to
showing
be
here.
able to totally get rid of recapture. I mean, but the number of districts that can, we were getting to the point where
We were
many
getting
districts
close.
were being added on to recapture
Right.
every year. And it'll just be that many fewer districts that'll be in recapture.
So they're
but-
losing money there too.
Yeah, that's one of the other things that's going to put financial pressure on the state. That's correct.
Okay, just wanted to clarify that. Thank you.
All right. As we move on, Mr. Bassett, I know there's a lot of unknowns, and we want to touch on those, but I want to make sure, for the time's sake, that we focus on, of course, what we do know, and we can touch on the unknowns and go from there. So, Mr. Gunn?
Thank you, Mr. President. Good evening, members of the board, Dr. Dupree. So the House Bill 3 also includes a mandatory provision for compensation adjustments, as we've discussed, and based on the new legislation, 30% of the increase to the basic allotment has to go towards compensation. And that's specified as educator compensation. So the way that they've broken that out is 75% of the 30% has to go to teachers, counselors, nurses, and librarians. And they also contain a provision that says that classroom teachers with more than, or 5 years or more of experience would receive some type of differentiation in the compensation, but as we were just discussing, they haven't specified what that actually means. The remaining 25% would be for all full-time employees with the exception of administrators. The House Bill 3 does say that compensation can include benefits such as health insurance, but as we're reviewing this, it's not necessarily our recommendation that we would include compensation as part of that, or the health benefits as part of that. It is on. Is that better? So on the mandatory compensation, as we look at this for Fort Bend ISD, it's based on the year-over-year increase and includes the ADA, or average daily attendance. And looking at that, we're going to expected to gain about $604 in ADA, or in additional revenues. And then when you apply that to our ADA, it works out to about $13.3 million that is mandated for us to use towards compensation. When you break that down on a per teacher basis, so we took 75% of that number, based it on the number of teachers that we had, that works out to about $2,000 per teacher. However, when you look at some of our other outlying districts, their amount is considerably higher, actually above $3,000. And you may recall in one of our prior meetings, we showed you a map that showed exactly where those districts were and what they were shaded red if they were higher. I refer to it as the Ring of Fire. Spring Branch, Pasadena, Aldine, and Ely for all the districts that are gaining substantially more than what we are. And unfortunately, if we're not able to match those, we would likely see some losses of teachers to those districts. So when we look at the compensation actions that we have taken for 18-19, the prior school year, you may recall that we did not do any raises. The teachers received the step increase, which is $500, and then there was a retention supplement that was given that was awarded in October. However, that was not recurring, meaning that for the upcoming year, staff members who are not on a teacher step will actually go down in compensation as a result of that if no other action is taken. And then for the 19-20 year, we do recommend that we exceed the compensation increase to ensure that we remain competitive, and I'll walk you through what those recommendations are. For the teacher side, we do recommend increasing the teacher starting rate from $53,000 to $55,500. That's a $2,500 increase, which is in line with some of those adjustments you saw just a moment ago. We would maintain the step increase of $500, and then to meet that provision that we differentiate teachers with 5 years of experience or more, there would be a $500 adjustment, at least at this point as we're looking at it, to their annual base salary. What that would work out to is teachers and librarians with 0 to 4 years of experience would receive a $3,000 raise. That's inclusive of the step. And then teachers on the steps 5 through 25 would receive a $3,500 increase. And that averages about 5.7% increase depending on the years of service. And I will add at this point, what we don't expect is any of the outlying districts, they will likely not go above the mandated raise amounts based on the amount we've seen in the uncertainty. But at this point, we feel like this would put us in a competitive position relative to other districts that are nearby.
And just to clarify, that 3,500, that's for all teachers, okay, above year 5. So I mean, we publish a scale through year 25, but all the teachers above year 5 and the librarians would get 3,500 more.
For counselors and nurses, they are not on the teacher pay scale, so we would recommend an adjustment of 5% to midpoint for those positions. That works out between $3,000 and about $3,600, depending on whether or not you are a counselor or a nurse. And they are based on a regular pay scale, so again, that will work out a little bit differently for them. For the non-teaching staff, all non-teachers except administrators, we would recommend also a 5% adjustment to the midpoint. And if we were to calculate the amount based off of House Bill 3, that would work out to about a 3.1% increase. And those non-teaching staff members are going to include bus drivers, classroom aides, and the different staff members such as police officers that are not included within the teacher scale, or counselors or librarians. On the administrator side, the legislature did not include what those administrator positions are, but they are excluded from mandatory compensation. Because we don't have a clear definition of what that is, we made our own assumptions, and essentially it's the superintendent, assistant superintendents, all directors, principals, assistant principals, associate principals, and deans of instruction. But again, we don't have any guidance on what those positions actually are, but that was the assumption that we made initially. However, based on what we're looking at, we would recommend also for those positions 5% of midpoint. And when you look at the total cost of the compensation, and I'm going to jump down just because that's what I was talking about, there are about 328 members of our staff that would be considered within that administrative band. But starting at the top, The mandatory compensation increase, if, as you recall, is $13.3 million. When you look at the number of teachers, counselors, and non-teaching staff that we have, that $23.1 million affects about